Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from Sylosis, the new Flesh, out February 20th on Nuclear Blast. The album has 11 tracks, 48 minutes in length, and this is the band's 7th full-length studio album. They are a British metal band. Now when it comes to the design of the record, the album is very dynamic and very fluid. It may not appear to be at first glance, but it is. It's an album that hides its uniquenesses in the way that it feels overall. It's an album that feels very heavy, sounds very heavy overall. And that blanket of heaviness that covers it allows you to not see right away what each and every single song has to offer from their own individual standpoint. Then when you look at how the songs are placed, they just come at the right time in order to offer the right element that you need to make the experience feel engaging all the way throughout. So it's a great design considering the songs and the overall sound that this album has. And that sound of this album is a sound that it cannot be defined by one genre. You cannot put this album under one specific umbrella. It's very versatile, it has a lot of different influences, and it's an album that it's a metal album, that's the best way to describe it sound-wise, and it's a heavy sounding album as well. Now, a lot of the heaviness on this record comes from the guitar sound, predominantly from the guitar sound. The guitar sound on this album is the catalyst of everything that happens. This is a very guitar focused, a very guitar driven record. Now it's not an overly produced album, it's actually quite rough around the edges, if you will. And when you look at the guitar sound and the heaviness of that guitar, a lot of it also comes from the fact that the album is not overly produced. The guitars don't sound super crisp, the guitars actually sound very live. They have that roughness to them. They have definitely that thickness of sound as well. So the thickness, the roughness, that lack of a better polished production behind them really allows them to jump into the forefront and constantly be in your face. The definition of heaviness throughout this album is drawn out by each and every single guitar riff, guitar sound that this album puts forward. Now there's more versatility to the guitar sound than just heaviness, and I think the way they presented that was in a very interesting way to me. So when I was listening to this album, I felt like the drums had more room to be a little bit bigger, to be a little bit heavier, to have a little bit more of an impact, because throughout the album I always felt like the drums took a little bit of a back seat to how heavy and how thumping the guitar sound is overall. The more I listened to the album, the more I realized that if the drums were a little bit closer to where the guitar sound is, the album would have become a lot more dense. And with a more dense sounding album, maybe perhaps the heaviness would felt even bigger. That is definitely a possibility. But what would end up happening is you would end up losing room for some of the more groovier melodies, some of the more groovier riffs to intertwine and reside in the space that currently exists between where the drums are and where the guitars reside. That in-between space of that heaviness of the guitars in the forefront and the more subdued drum sound in the back, it's heavy, but it's not as heavy as the guitars. There is a little bit of room in between them, and that room is where you're going to find a lot of melodies, a lot of groovier riffs, a lot of elements guitar-wise that help soften the sound a little bit, not allowing the overall record to have that sense of density, which therefore wouldn't allow the listener to really see all of the different elements that make this record what this record is. So it's important to have that difference there. It's important to have that room, because without those melodies, without those groovier riffs, the album would feel very one-directional, one-dimensional. It would lose a little bit of the life that it has, because what the guys from Sylosis prove with this album is that you can create a very heavy record, you can create a heavy album that has a live sound experience in the studio, and at the same time you can still add a lot of layers and a lot of texture to it to make the overall sound feel very rich, but not to the point where it's overproduced and incredibly clean. So it's a fine balance that they worked out on this album. It's an interesting aspect because they brought elements of a live performance into the studio, and then they used studio elements to enhance that live performance that was recorded indoors. It's quite an interesting dynamic that this record has sound-wise, but it works so well, it's so captivating, such a great sounding album all around, And the fact that they gave the guitars a lot of time and a lot of focus, allowing them to be the main pillar of the sound experience on this record, I think it bodes well for a band like Sylosis. It really allows them to push boundaries as far as heaviness is concerned, but also push boundaries as far as intensity and aggression can go. Now, once you get into the vocals on this album are phenomenal. Either be the clean vocals or the harsh vocals. The dynamic between the two is really important for an album like this, because this album also has a lot of modern metal elements to it. So having those two different styles, those two different approaches, work phenomenally well for an album that sounds like this, that feels like this. It adds to the overall throwback experience that this record also has. But the vocal performance is top notch. I really like the production behind the vocals, because considering how heavy and at times how thick that guitar sound is, to have the vocals surpass it and to have the vocals really distance themselves and feel like they have their own lane to walk on, allows the album to have a little bit more life. It allows the album to have more energy, and it also allows the listener to connect with the lyrical content, which on this record is phenomenal. I highly advise listening to the record, read the lyrics as you're listening to the record, because the lyrics on this album are not to be thrown away. Great lyrical content, great poetry, if you will, on this album, which just makes the overall record feel even heavier. Because now you don't have just an album that is heavy sonically, or that it's heavy from a vocal delivery standpoint. You also have an album that from a message standpoint feels and comes across extremely heavy. All around, when you put all of these elements around, I really think that this album is one of the most Sylosis sounding records that the band has released in a very long time. This is a great sounding album for the band. It's an album that brings a lot of the past, but also represents the present, and it allows you to see how they can bring that studio performance, enhance it with live elements, and create a very sonically pleasing album all around. Now, as far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Beneath the Surface. This is the opening track on the record, and I love this as an opening song because, as always, for me, an opening track on any record has to set the table. It has to set the mood for what the album is going to deliver. And if you have a heavy album, and that's the image you want to put, or the experience you want to engrave in the mind of the listener, nothing better than starting with a very heavy song. And that's exactly what you have with Beneath the Surface. The guitars sound excellent. The drums add some size and some heaviness to the track, but the guitars also have not just that size, that thickness, that heaviness to them, they also have a lot of grooviness, and the grooviness of the guitars really jumps off the track. So you see all of those different layers, like I mentioned earlier, the drums a little bit behind the guitars, the heaviness of the guitars a little bit more in the forefront, and then the grooviness interlaying those layers in order to add more texture to the overall sound. The vocals coming in with the reverb is such an old school element, specifically thrash metal element, and even some death metal elements. Some bands, I can go back to the early 90s with bands like Sepultura, Carcass, did that quite a bit with using the reverb for the vocals to come into a track. I really like it. It matches the energy of the sound. It just gives a little bit more vibrato to the way the song comes across. It makes the song feel a little bit more punchier, more raw, more energetic, if you will. It just adds attitude, and I think adding attitude to a track vocally that already has a lot of attitude from a musical standpoint is always a great connection. It just emphasizes what that experience, what that track wants to be. Allowing a little bit of a bass bridge on this song, in my opinion, it adds epicness to the track. It makes the track feel a little bit more complete, and it rounds it up in a much better way, allowing you to feel like every single element of the band was represented on a single song, but not losing track of how heavy you want the track to sound. Then you have Mirror Mirror. This is an insane track, easily one of my favorite songs of the entire album. The heaviness, the grooviness, the killer guitar sound all around, the anger in the vocals really jumps out. It really comes across. And the anger in the lyrics as well. I mean, everything about this song feels intense. It's a very intense track, but it's also a track that has a lot of layers to it. I really like the drum sound on this song. Some of my favorite drum sound and drum fills are on this track. I really like what they've done drum wise. as far as Mirror Mirror is concerned. Perhaps one of the songs where the drums are a little bit closer to those guitars, so there's not as much of a gap between them as in, for example, Beneath the Surface. This allows the overall track to feel even heavier, even more intense, even more in your face. And if there's a track that has that circle pit atmosphere to it, it's definitely this one. Adding a solo to this track is the absolute icing on the cake. Anytime you have a song that has that that brunt of heaviness coming at you, that sense of intensity just really being in your face, specifically when drums and guitars are working in parallel with one another to provide that sort of experience, adding a guitar solo helps break that. And you almost need that. You need a little bit of a reprieve, you need a little bit of a break to allow then the song to kickstart itself again and you to go back to that sense of heaviness and feel like you took enough of a breath that you can exhaust yourself with the bottom end of the track. So I really like the way this song is put together. It jumped out at me immediately the moment I went through the album, and it's definitely one of the most consistently heavier, old school sounding songs that this album has, both sonically and vocally. Now, as far as the last track on my top 3 songs for this record goes, I picked Circle of Swords. The drums are a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker on this track as well, but still there is some room between them and the guitars. The vocals come across at times almost a little bit unhinged, or at least at the very edge of becoming unhinged. The faster periods of this song, the more driven periods of this song, mixed in with some more melodic periods, really create some internal ebbs and flows that work really well for the track. This is a song that feels like it's constantly changing, not necessarily the direction, but the focus, and you're constantly changing your focus with it. So that allows the track to have a lot of internal movement, to feel like it's always on the brink of failure, both musically and vocally. That sense of being unhinged is present throughout the track, in the way the track is constructed, in the way the track is delivered, the sound, the vocals, everything about it. It has some thrash metal influences, specifically in the guitar sound and in the guitar riffs, but the underlying melody, it's almost impossible to hear the melody on this track, but it's there because the drums on this song are a little bit closer to those guitars. It's a lot more difficult to detect that melody, and the melody is so fainted in between those layers, but the fact that it's there makes the song feel a little bit more powerful. It adds a little bit more richness to it. It makes the song feel a little bit more robust and not, once again, one-dimensional. And I think that's an important aspect because you have the same attributes as you have in all the other songs on the record. You're just moving them around slightly, so there's certain adjustments that you have to make, but never lose track of what do you want this song to be on its own and what do you want this song to be in the overall context of the record. This is it, Sylosis, the new flesh, once again out February 20th on Nuclear Blast. Go check them out. Let me know your thoughts on the singles. Hit me up in the comment section, and I'll see you all at the next one. Take care, guys.